In a small, isolated town nestled between mist-covered mountains, there stood an old, crumbling convent, St. Ursula's Monastery. The locals spoke little about it, but when they did, their whispers were filled with fear. It had been decades since the convent was abandoned, but even the most courageous residents of the town knew that there was something still very much alive within its haunted walls. The place had a history steeped in dark rumors. Once home to a group of devout nuns, it had closed abruptly following a mysterious fire that consumed most of the building. However, the fire hadn't claimed all lives. Some nuns had disappeared entirely, leaving nothing but charred remnants behind. Others spoke of sightings, strange figures standing at the broken windows, flickering shadows moving within the ruins, and cold whispers echoing on the wind. It was said that the head nun, Sister Helena, had delved into dark practices, sacrificing the souls of her followers in the name of something far more sinister than faith. Over the years, people who dared to venture close to the convent spoke of an oppressive, malevolent force that seemed to emanate from its crumbling stone walls, a force that made your skin crawl and your breath feel heavy, as though the very air was suffocating. Detective Sarah Thompson had faced everything in her career: gruesome murders, missing persons, and cold cases. But nothing could have prepared her for this. The phone call was brief, the tone urgent. A series of disappearances in a town she had never heard of, all leading back to the St. Ursula Monastery. People had gone missing, and the police were at a loss. Rumors swirled that the convent wasn't just a place of history, it was something alive, a dark force, a curse, or worse. As Sarah drove through the thick fog and winding roads toward the town, she felt an eerie sense of déjà vu. It was as though the very landscape was conspiring against her. The trees were barren, their gnarled limbs reaching like claws toward the sky. The air was cold, biting, and unwelcoming. A distant howl of the wind sent shivers down her spine. Yet she pressed forward. She had no choice. She had to solve this. Arriving at the town, she felt a growing sense of unease. The streets were empty, shops shuttered, and windows dark. It was as if the entire town had been abandoned long ago, leaving only ghosts behind. Yet at the edge of town, the looming silhouette of St. Ursula's Monastery stood like a predator, waiting. Its Gothic spires clawed at the sky, black as pitch against the deepening dusk. Sarah parked at the base of the crumbling path leading up to the convent. The wind moaned between the trees, and the low growl of distant thunder rumbled in the distance. She grabbed her flashlight, checked her gun, and began her ascent. As Sarah pushed through the iron gates, they creaked in protest, echoing through the unnerving silence. The grounds were overgrown. Vines snaked around forgotten statues, and the once pristine garden was now a wild thicket. A suffocating darkness clung to every corner of the property. It felt like the very land was alive, watching her every move. The building loomed before her, an ancient crumbling shell of its former self. The stone walls seemed to sigh as the wind swept through the abandoned halls. As Sarah stepped inside, the air turned heavy, thick with dust and the scent of decay. Her flashlight flickered as she walked deeper into the convent, illuminating broken furniture and decayed wood. The silence was unnerving. No sounds, no animals, nothing. She moved cautiously through the eerie hallways, her steps echoing on the cracked floorboards. Then she heard it, a whisper so faint it was almost imperceptible. She froze. The voice was unmistakable, yet impossible to place. "You're not welcome here, detective." Sarah spun, flashlight raised, but there was no one in sight. Her pulse quickened. She wasn't alone. Then she saw it, a figure standing motionless at the far end of the hallway, cloaked in a black habit, her face obscured by a veil. For a moment, Sarah thought it was one of the many abandoned nuns of the convent, but the air around the figure felt wrong, cold, unearthly. As the figure stepped into the light, Sarah's blood ran cold. It was no ordinary nun. It was her, Sister Helena, the head nun from the convent's twisted past. But this was not a woman anymore. Her skin was pale, stretched tight over bone, and her eyes were black voids, endless and hollow. Her mouth twisted into a grin that wasn't human. "Welcome, detective," Sister Helena crooned. her voice a mixture of serenity and madness. "I've been waiting for you." Without warning, the nun lunged at Sarah. Her speed was unnatural, inhuman, and Sarah barely managed to dodge. The nun's face contorted, her eyes glowing with dark fire as she hissed, "You are mine now." The convent seemed to come alive, shifting, bending, as though the very walls were closing in on her. Sarah fumbled for her gun, but as she aimed, the bullets passed through the nun's body as if she were made of smoke. The nun's laughter echoed, eerie and mocking, bouncing off the walls, making it impossible to tell which way to run. "You cannot escape," Sister Helena sneered, her voice growing louder with each step Sarah took. "This is my domain. You will never leave." Sarah bolted, heart pounding in her chest, her footsteps echoing in the endless hallways. The walls seemed to warp around her, distorting the very shape of the building. The convent itself was fighting her, trapping her, forcing her to relive the horrors of its past. She rounded a corner, her flashlight flickering once again, and the chapel doors appeared before her, hanging precariously on their hinges. She charged toward them, but as she reached the threshold, she heard a chilling sound, a shrill scream that filled the air, paralyzing her with terror. Inside the chapel, the air grew thick with malice. Sarah had to find the heart of the evil, destroy it, or she would never leave. She could feel the dark presence pressing in, suffocating her, but she knew what she had to do. At the altar, hidden beneath the floorboards, was the cursed relic that powered Sister Helena's malevolent force. With trembling hands, Sarah tore at the rotting floor, revealing the object, a black pulsating stone, etched with ancient symbols. She knew if she destroyed it, the curse would be broken. Without thinking, she grabbed a torch from a fallen pillar and hurled it onto the relic. Fire erupted in an instant, consuming the stone. A horrific scream filled the chapel as Sister Helena's form began to contort and writhe in agony. The convent trembled around her. The walls cracked, and the ground beneath her feet split open. In that moment, Sarah realized the curse had not only consumed Sister Helena, but had bound the evil to the very land itself. As the flames engulfed the relic, the convent seemed to collapse in on itself, the centuries-old foundation shattering. The shriek of Sister Helena echoed through the crumbling building as the spirit that had once possessed her was torn apart by the fire. The convent groaned, its walls and spires falling into ruin, consumed by the flames. Sarah barely made it out in time. She ran, coughing and choking on the smoke, just as the building collapsed behind her in a thunderous crash. She stumbled into the clearing outside, her breath ragged as she watched the flames devour the cursed place. The town would be free. The curse was broken. Sarah stood before the smoking ruins of St. Ursula's Monastery, the wind now calm and quiet. The town would return to peace. But as she walked away, a lingering thought kept her from truly feeling victorious. There was always a darkness. The battle might be won, but evil had many forms, and this victory wouldn't last forever. As she left the ruins behind, she couldn't shake the feeling that, somewhere in the shadows, Sister Helena's spirit, her malevolent force, still waited, watching, waiting for her return.